Hi guys and welcome back to the Mighty Blues. My name is of course Cameron and welcome back today to another video, a different type of video. Today we will be discussing Richard Masters' comments at the meeting where he and Rick Parry met a number of MPs to discuss a number of different issues. They were discussing the need for an independent regulator within football. Rick Parry really believing that football is in need of an independent regulator. He, of course, is the head of the EFL. Richard Masters not so, believing that the football is in need of a regulator, which is quite telling when you think about everything that has happened between the Premier League and Everton over the course of the last 12 months. They also discussed numerous other situations, such as Everton's situation. They discussed Reading's situation, and they discussed a potential deal between the Premier League and the EFL. And all in all, it was a pretty telling hour and a half to 2 hours worth of discussion, and it was obviously broadcasted live for anybody to watch if they pleased on the internet. And as I'm sure like a lot of you, I sat down and I watched every single second of it because I wanted to hear what exactly Richard Masters had to say, not only about Everton's situation but just about football in general and where he feels the Premier League is at. And as I've just said, he had some telling things to say. Before I get into any of it, I just want to talk about his mannerisms and his appearance and his manner during the meeting. I don't know whether this is just me coming from a biased standpoint and a biased point of view, obviously being an Evertonian, but every single time Richard Masters appeared to open his mouth, it seemed like he was making it up on the spot. It seemed like he didn't really believe what he was saying and he didn't really understand what he was saying. He was just trying to make up what was the best sounding answer in the Premier League's best interest. And that meant that a lot of the answers he gave, he took time to give, and a lot of them he gave were rebutted quite rightly by the MPs with further questions. I just find this whole situation quite worrying, really. When we talk about football and where football is at and how football has changed over the last 15, 20 years or so, and there's a conversation between has it changed for the worse or the better, and you've got people like Richard Masters saying, well, you've got loads of people that want to buy EFL clubs with loads of money, so therefore it's changed for the better. It seemed like every positive Richard Masters spoke about today, or every rebuttal he had to the questions, was about how much money can be made and how much money certain people and certain clubs are going to make, and wanting to divide that money between everybody else. Effectively, it was all about the money, which is what we've known to be the case for quite some time. But I just find it quite sad that I'm having to sit here and do a video like this. 4 or 5 years ago when I made this channel and when, pardon me, when I decided to start a fan channel about Everton Football Club, I thought I'd be coming on here to talk about games of football that Everton had played and good performances or bad performances. I thought I'd be coming on here and talking about exciting transfers that the club are making, or maybe discuss some players that could potentially leave the football club, because that ultimately is what football is about. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. I never, ever, ever wanted, whether it be growing up as an Evertonian, whether it be starting the channel, whether it be now, I've never, ever, ever wanted to be a part of a conversation about Everton's finances, or to be privy to information about the Premier League's rulebook and about why Everton, may or may not have breached the breach, and why those rules don't quite make any sense, and why they're not fair, and why they favour others. I never wanted to be any part of that conversation. I'm an Evertonian. When I was growing up, going to Goodison Park at 5, 6, 7 years old with my dad, I wasn't saying to him, Dad, I wonder how much money Everton have got to spend this summer. I wonder how close we are to the P&S limit of the Premier League. And I wonder why the Premier League's P&S limit favours certain sides rather than other sides and almost stops other sides from competing. I wasn't saying that. I was saying, who do you think's going to score today, Dad? What do you think the game's going to be like? Because all I was ever interested in, and all I am ever interested in now, still to this day, is football. is Everton Football Club, is what happens on the pitch, is what players we're signing, is what manager is in the dugout. We shouldn't need to care about what's going on behind the scenes, the finances of the football club. Obviously we care about the ownership of the football club and who owns our football club, but all the background work and things like this meeting today, we should never really have had any interest in. But we have got an interest in because our football club is being directly impacted by the decisions that these people are making. And instead of coming on here and doing an instant match reaction or reacting to Everton signing a brand new striker that's going to come in and we're going to get him on the back of our shirts and he's going to be boss, or Everton signing a brand new, winger who's going to come in and we're all dead excited to see him. We're not. We're doing videos about Everton signing a lawyer to defend themselves in court. We're doing videos, an instant reaction to a court proceeding. I've never watched a court proceeding in my life. Sorry, not a court proceeding, and a meeting between MPs and the CEO of the Premier League. I've never watched anything like that in my life. I've never been interested in sitting down for an hour and a half or 2 hours and watching somebody argue their point against a load of MPs. Never had any interest in it, yet I couldn't take my eyes away from that today. Not because it was wildly entertaining or I'm hugely interested, but because it directly impacts the thing that is arguably the most important to me in my life and has been the most important to me over the course of the last 25 years. So I had to take an interest today. And that is how sad things are. And that is how much football has fallen over the last few years. Is not only now are we having to take a vested interest in things that are going on behind the scenes that really we shouldn't need to, because they should be taken care of by the people in charge of the football club and by a decent rule book that makes sense. But we're also at the point now where football is being decided in a courtroom, and football is being decided in meetings like this and situations like today. Everton and Nottingham Forest are both within a position where, come the end of the season, they could be in the relegation zone come the final game of the season and yet not be relegated due to appeals going on about financial situations. Everton are in a position where they could finish rock bottom of the Premier League table this year on the final day and yet still be playing Premier League football the season following, dependent on what the court decide is the correct outcome to, well, both of our appeals now, but certainly the first one, which takes huge importance. How have we got to that position? How have we got to that stage where football is being decided in courtrooms, where teams are not going out and signing a brand new striker to help, improve their chances of finishing higher up the table in January? Teams are bringing in lawyers to try and combat an incredibly confusing and, quite frankly, defunct set of rules that have charged clubs for trying to become more sustainable. We spoke about this yesterday when Everton received the charge about how, although they claim it's all about profit and sustainability, there's actually only one of them words that matter to the Premier League and that matter to the higher ups, and that is profit. It's not about profit and sustainability for each individual club for the Premier League. It's about how can we make sure we make the most profit we can. Okay, to do that, we have to make sure that the 6 clubs that make the most money are always in the top positions in the league table, and everybody else underneath them is just there to exist effectively and to participate in games of football. And Richard Masters coming out today and saying things like fans do matter and each Premier League club matters as much as the next is complete and utter nonsense. And as I said, you can tell on his face when he's saying it himself, he doesn't believe the words that are coming out of his mouth. Let me just read some of the quotes from Richard Masters during today's meeting. He started, obviously, by talking about the agreement between the Premier League and the EFL for new funding. Very little of that argument and agreement had anything to do with Everton Football Club. But the first real sort of interesting thing he said in the meeting was he was asked about fans. He was asked specifically, before they spoke about Everton's case, he was asked specifically about the Reading case. And quite interestingly enough, out of those MPs that were around the table today questioning Richard Masters, one of them was a Portsmouth fan. The chair was a Portsmouth fan who had a fantastic ending line, which we'll talk about later on in the video. One of them was a Reading fan, who of course is going through turbulent times with his football club at the moment. I think one of them was a fan of a lower league club who hasn't benefited from the parachute payments and therefore is effectively stuck in the lower leagues. You had various different people who supported various different football clubs who have been directly affected by the way football is currently being run in this country. And Richard Masters said, it is fans that matter. Without fans, we don't have a game. In the end, it is up to the leaders of the game to come together on big issues, whether that be on financial regulation or any other big topic in the game. The current PSR system, we are contemplating making change to that over time. So this, I believe, was when it was about during the same time that he was asked about whether or not he believes an independent regulator, is needed, and he said this, and then he said something along the lines of, "I think it's better if we come to these conclusions ourselves as opposed to an independent regulator coming in and having a say." Now that is already an incredibly interesting statement and shows exactly where Richard Masters is and the Premier League are in terms of the independent regulator. He can come out all he likes and say, yeah, we're willing to cooperate and yes, we want to do what's best for football. But when he comes out and says things like, we believe that we don't need an independent regulator because we believe that we can come to these decisions ourselves, it's quite telling, especially when you then hear Rick Parry, and I don't know much about Rick Parry, and I'm not trying to defend Rick Parry. I don't know how he deals in the EFL and how EFL clubs feel about him, but especially when you hear him come out and say things like, we're effectively have got no choice but to agree a deal with the Premier League because where else are we going to go? We can't go to La Liga, we can't go to Germany, we can't go and play our football elsewhere. So whilst there is conversations ongoing and whilst they're not physically forced to agree anything by the Premier League, they're also put in a position where it's like, you know, what do you choose? Do you choose to not take the deal and then be in the same position as you are now, or do you choose to take the deal, which is heavily unfair on EFL clubs? So to say this is quite interesting when he talks about it's up to the leaders of the game to come together on big issues. It's not. It's up to an independent regulator now to come together on big issues. And the fact that he even managed to utter the words, it is the fans that matter, without fans we don't have a game, is quite comical, considering he has taken no consideration to the fans when punishing Everton and now Nottingham Forest. And another thing I find really interesting is during this meeting, it was spoken about punishing owners, and it was quite heavily targeted towards Rick Parry from the member of the committee who was a Reading fan. I'm not quite sure of his name, I apologise, but he was quite consistent in his question to Rick Parry about why the Reading fans are being punished due to points deductions and implications, and why it isn't just the owner. And they spoke for a while about Reading's owner and the fact that Reading's owner has done this twice at other football clubs in different parts of the world, where he's come in, he's put a load of money into it, it hasn't quite worked, he's then stopped putting any money into it, and instead he's completely asset stripped the whole club and left it with just the training ground. That point was raised a couple of times, and it was quite obvious that in the Reading circumstance, it is absolutely 100% down to their owner, as it is in most circumstances, as it is in Everton's circumstance. The reason Everton are where we are is because of a gross amount of mismanagement at the top of the football club for a number of years, and a set of rules that completely don't make any sense and favour certain teams over others. Reading situation, obviously a little bit different because it's in the EFL, but similarly, their owner has put them in a position where they now feel the need to encroach onto the pitch and get games abandoned because of the poor ownership. And I'm absolutely behind Reading for doing that, by the way, 100% spot on. It's brilliant what they've done. And it was spoken about for a while about punishing owners as opposed to punishing fans. And for Richard Masters to then come out and say, it is fans that matter, without fans we don't have a game, is quite ironic when there are implications that can be put on owners. There are implications that can be put on billionaires who own football clubs without that without that having an impact on the club itself. Because one thing is quite obvious here, And let's just talk about Everton's case for the moment, because I am here to talk about Everton's case. I'm not here to talk about anybody else's case. But one thing is quite obvious here, and that is that the 10-point deduction that Everton have received already this season, alongside any other punishment we may be given for the next breach. But let's just focus on the 10-point deduction for a second. The 10-point deduction that Everton have been given this season has had absolutely no impact on Farhad Moshiri whatsoever. It's had no impact on Denise Barrett-Baxendale. It's had no impact on Grant Ingles, and it's had no impact on Bill Kenwright. It's had no impact on any of the people that put Everton in the situation that they're currently in, leading us to be found guilty of a breach of P&S and therefore punished by a 10-point deduction. It's not had any impact on any of them. They've all been removed from the football club now, and the owner himself, he doesn't care if Everton finish 15th or if Everton finish rock bottom. He doesn't care. He wants out, he wants his money, and he's going to move on. The only people that are impacted by the points deduction and the punishment is the fans, the players, and the manager. And anybody else that works around the football club that may or may not, their job may or may not be in question if we are to be relegated. So it is the fans that matter. Without the fans, we don't have a game. He then goes on to say about how clubs need to follow rules, and if clubs don't follow rules, then other clubs expect them to be punished, etc., etc. Let's be honest, when you say club, it's a very broad term, football club. A football club is made up of players. A football club is made up of manager. A football club is made up of fans. A football club is made up of staff. A football club is made up of a board of directors, and a football club is made up of an owner. It's not the clubs that expect other clubs to comply with the rules, otherwise they should be punished. It's the owners of the club that are responsible to comply with the rules. It's the board of directors of the football club that are responsible for complying with the rules. And if they don't comply with the rules, it should be them who are specifically punished. Now, I don't know what that punishment is. I don't know whether that punishment is a huge fine for each individual member of whatever club's board have failed to comply. I don't know whether it's a transfer embargo on the owner. I don't know whether it's a case of I don't know. The answer to the question is I don't know exactly what that punishment should be on the ownership and the board of a football club who have failed PSR and have failed to comply. However, what I do know is it's absolutely not fair for that punishment to come down on the players and the manager and the fans of a football club who have done nothing wrong. And when Masters talks about fans matter, and when Masters talks about Everton being one of the founding members of the Premier League and an ever-present member of the Premier League, and they matter hugely, really, he doesn't believe that himself. Because had that be the case, then the rules would state that it's the owners of the football clubs that are punished as opposed to the football clubs. The whole sort of topic of today's meeting and the basis around today's meeting, which I found quite interesting, was that it was all about almost how we can stop, and this was the case with the EFL argument as well. How can we avoid owners of clubs from overspending and putting clubs in a situation and in a position where they are in serious trouble financially and could face administration and could face, X, Y, and Z going on with the football clubs, because that is about sustainability. The sustainable argument is we need to make sure that whoever you are owning this football club, you don't put that football club in a position where it can fail. But the resolution to that is, if you do put that football club in a position where it can fail, then we're not going to directly punish you or fine you or give you a sanction or an implication. We're going to do it to the football club, meaning that either way, the football club is put in a position to fail. And either way, the football club is put in a position where financially it is perilous. How does that make any sense whatsoever? How? We already know the process of allowing people to come and buy football clubs in this country needs to be assessed, because it's quite clearly not appropriate, is it? For the Reading owner to be allowed to have come in and own Reading after doing what he's currently doing now to them in 2 other countries with 2 other previous clubs shows that the process of allowing people into this country to own football clubs needs changing. But if your whole premise is we want to protect football clubs from rogue ownership, or from owners being able to come in and spend an awful lot of money and put the club in a perilous position, then how is the solution to deduct points from football clubs? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Masters then went on. He was asked then directly, pardon me, about Everton. He went through a period of questions about the EFL deal and why they haven't come to a deal and what the figures are behind that. And obviously, that's not got anything to do with Everton, so I'm not really going to talk too much on that. However, he did also seem during those conversations that he didn't really know what he was talking about. He then went on. He was asked about Everton. He was asked about the situation between Everton Football Club and obviously the Premier League, the 10-point deduction, the fact that the 10-point deduction specifically is already being taken off Everton, despite the fact that there is an appeal in place. And if that appeal is successful, then it would mean the points deduction doesn't stand. He was basically told it's a messy situation. He said, I don't think it's messy. Nobody likes enforcing the financial rules. It's the first time the Premier League has done it. Okay, let's take that statement as a very base. Nobody likes enforcing the financial rules. It's the first time the Premier League has done it. Why then? Why? If nobody likes enforcing the financial rules and the Premier League has not felt the need to do it before, then why has it done it twice to Everton and once to Nottingham Forest after admitting that the rules are going to be changed, or the rules are looking at being changed? Surely the logical explanation would be, well, we don't really like enforcing financial rules, and considering we're thinking about changing them, let's just hold off on this a moment and take everything into consideration. Richard Masters was asked specifically today whether or not he and the Premier League are making decisions in order to try and put off the need for an independent regulator. If they have treated the Everton case as almost a will show you we don't need a regulator by enforcing these rules. And in turn doing that, he is ironically further proved that they do need an independent regulator. He was asked whether or not that's the case today. Plain and simple, have you enforced these rules, or have you, sort of clamped down on certain situations in order to try and prove that you do not need an independent regulator? He said, no, that isn't the case. But then everything else he said that followed proved it to be the case. He was asked about Manchester City and why Manchester City's situation has taken so long. He said, he was asked if he can understand the fans' frustration. He said, yes, I can, but they are very different charges. That's all I would say. If any club, whether the champions or otherwise, were found in a breach for 2022-23, they would be in the same position as Forest and Everton. Bollocks. I can't give you any details on Manchester City except a date is being set, but I can't tell you what that date is. Why? Why can't you tell us what that date is? Why? Apparently fans are the most important thing within football, Richard. So why can you not tell us fans when that date for Manchester City's trial is or Manchester City's situation is going to take place? Why can't you tell us that? If fans are the most important people within football, then surely you should be able to say this is when the Manchester City situation is going to take place, and we should be able to look forward to seeing what the outcome of that is. He was then asked about Everton's new ownership and why it's taken so long for the 777 takeover to be confirmed. He said, unfortunately, some processes take a matter of weeks. If we haven't had satisfactory answers to the questions we've asked, it's going to take longer. And then he was asked repeatedly how long it would take. He said, I can't say how long it will take, but hopefully weeks. So this is obviously a really interesting point about 777. And if it is the case that 777 are taking too long to answer questions and are not giving satisfactory answers to questions that are being asked, then surely that gives you your answer about whether or not they are capable of running a Premier League football club. You know, we're talking about sustainability here. We've just had an hour near enough talking about Reading's situation and how their owner was allowed to come in and take them over, despite the fact he had previous history of ruining and destroying football clubs in previous countries, and that is exactly what he is doing now to Reading. And yet, an hour later, half an hour later, whatever it is, Masters comes out and says, we haven't had satisfactory answers to the questions we've asked, so it's going to take longer, hopefully weeks. Well, that is almost like saying it isn't an approval process, isn't it? Because an approval process surely is, if you give us the answers to the questions that we need, then we will give you the approval. If you don't, then you will not get the approval. But this is almost saying we've not had the answers to the questions that we need. So instead of just saying, well, that means you're not getting approval because you're not giving us satisfactory answers, we're just going to keep it going for a few more weeks. And then after a few more weeks, we'll just take any old answer and we'll allow you through the door. That is your answer. The fact that they've not given satisfactory answers to the questions, and this doesn't benefit Everton specifically because I genuinely believe and I'm concerned that if 777 don't take over Everton, then Everton will enter administration. I genuinely am concerned about that. Now, you might tell me that I shouldn't be, and you might tell me 100 reasons why that won't happen, but I'm concerned that that will happen. So this doesn't benefit Everton for me to say this, but what also doesn't benefit Everton is if the Premier League allows 777 to come in and 777 completely ruin us and drag us through the dirt as much as what we have been under Farhad Mashiri, and then we all sit here and say, well, they weren't given satisfactory answers when the questions were being asked prior to the takeover, so why were they allowed to take over in the first place? Again, doesn't make much sense. Richard Masters then went to say, those standard directions are for everybody, not just for small clubs. So if anybody was found in breach and put forward their PSR calculations and they were above the threshold, we'd be doing the exact same thing on the exact same time frame. Interesting use of the word small clubs there. I don't think Richard Masters is aware that Everton are one of the biggest football clubs in this country and therefore one of the biggest football clubs in the world. And to label us as a small football club is not only incredibly disrespectful, but also quite telling of how you view Everton Football Club amongst how you view others. Everton are a bigger football club than Tottenham Hotspur, without a shadow of a doubt. Everton are a bigger football club historically than Manchester City, without a shadow of a doubt. Everton are a bigger football club historically than Chelsea, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, okay, Chelsea and Manchester City may be argued because of their recent success in recent times, but Everton are a much bigger football club than the majority of the football clubs in the Premier League. So to label us as a small club quite clearly tells you that Richard Masters himself, as well as the Premier League, follow a mindset of there are 6 football clubs who are significantly bigger than anybody else, proving the point that they believe that those 6 football clubs that are significantly bigger, make significantly more money for this league. Yeah. As I said before, Masters' sort of rebuttal and defence to the Everton situation was stick to the rules. Stick to the rules and you won't get fined. You won't get charged. If you stick to the rules, then Premier League football clubs are happy with that and there will be no additional charges. But it would be easier for Premier League clubs to stick to the rules. And by the way, as I'm having these conversations, I'm not defending Everton Football Club. I know Everton Football Club have been culprits and have ultimately been responsible for the downfall. I know that. And I've sat on this channel so many times over the years and criticised Mashiri, criticised Bill Kenwright, criticised Denise Barrett-Baxendale. I've criticised all of them. So I know Everton are compliant in this situation 100%. But if the rule book was a little bit clearer and made a little bit more sense and wasn't due to be changed in the next 4 to 5 months, then maybe it would be easier to stick to the rules. Maybe it would be easier to stick to the rules if Everton had 100 charges against them. And instead of only having 1 and complying with the Premier League, maybe it would have been easier if Everton had 100 charges and said, do us a favour, piss off, mate, we're not complying, we'll see you in court. Maybe we wouldn't be in this position now. Yeah. Again, that pretty much sums up the meeting, really. I just want to give a big shout out to Julie of the Everton Fans Advisory Board, who was present today in the meeting and sat right behind Richard Masters wearing an Everton top, and her facial expressions to the majority of what Richard Masters was saying was absolutely fantastic. Julie Clark of the Fans Advisory Board, absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic, and a big shout out to Julie for not only being present but also being present in the view of a camera. That's a very clever move, that by Julie. Very clever move. There's one thing about being present in a meeting like this and being there to witness it. We're all witnessing it. We can all hear what's being said. It's a much bigger impact if you put yourself in a position where you can be seen, and to sit right behind Masters and hear the words coming out of his mouth and then see her direct reaction is absolutely unbelievable. She giggled when he said we want to be open and transparent, because they don't want to be open and transparent, and that's quite clearly obvious. I thought I'd read this tweet from Mark Douglas, who is an incredibly, incredibly interesting tweet from Mark Douglas, who is a journalist, of course. He said he was talking in response to the fact that Richard Masters refused to tell us about the date of Manchester City's situation or trial or whatever it might be. And the tweet reads, "And here's one of the problems with the system. We can't tell you when. Why not? Why is the commission not heard in public? Why is there still not designated penalties for PSR breaches? Oversight required, or we end up where we are. Independent regulator needed." And I couldn't agree more with that. I really couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, I think one quite obvious thing to take from this is that Masters is absolutely terrified of an independent regulator. And even the other fella sat next to him, who I've completely forgotten his name, even he, the CEO of the EFL, quite clearly wants an independent regulator, and quite clearly is for it, and quite clearly believes that it is needed. Yeah, every time it was brought up, every bit of evidence Richard Masters had to give was A, a load of nonsense, and B, further proved, ironically, that there is a need for an independent regulator. And I just want to read this before we leave, because I think it's really interesting. The chair of the meeting was a Portsmouth fan, and the very last words that she spoke before the meeting ended was, "If this was a Pompey game that I was attending, and you two," meaning Richard Masters and the EFL, what's his name? Rick Perry, is it? Something like that. The EFL CEO, and you two were referees, we'd be at the point where the crowd is singing, "You don't know what you're doing." And that quite clearly tells you the position that the MPs were in today when listening to what was being said, and the position that we are all in terms of the dying need for an independent regulator. These people don't know what they're doing, and are incapable of incapable of running their businesses for the fairness of the game. And that has been evidenced over the last few months, and quite clearly evidenced in today's meeting as well. Another thing I want to talk about is the whole PSR sort of statement. It's just a situation in itself, the whole PSR rule in itself. I think it's quite interesting to find that Premier League's PS rules were introduced in 2013. The figure is £105 million. That's the figure that football clubs are allowed to lose over the space of 3 years. That figure has never changed. Ever changed. In the 10 years, going on 11 years that rule has been introduced, that figure has never changed. It has always been 105 million. Now, let me tell you why that doesn't make any sense. In that 10 years, inflation, not only in this country but in the world, has gone through the roof. 10 years ago, a player going for 50, 60 million pounds was seen as a huge, massive, big money signing that only the top clubs could make. Now, Most Premier League clubs can make 50, 60 million pound signings, or could do if the rules allowed them to. Players back then were on 100 grand a week, and it was seen as a lucrative amount of money, a huge amount of money. Now players are on 500 grand a week. Let me just read you some real life examples. Over the last 12 months, so this is just 12 months, never mind 10 years, this is just 12 months. Low fat milk has gone up by 46%, sugar by 38.5%, eggs by 28.9%, butter by 29.3%, pasta 29.1%, tea 11.2%, coffee 10.1%, mineral and spring water 23.3%, sports equipment 4.3%. So that's just general everyday items that have gone up significantly due to inflation in the last 12 months. Never mind 10 years. So why isn't that taken into consideration? Why is that figure not being raised due to inflation? It's costing a football club an awful lot more money now to run than what it was costing them in 2013, and that is just a fact, especially a Premier League football club. That is just a fact. So the fact that those rules haven't been changed to take that into consideration is quite frankly baffling. Absolutely baffling. Because it's like saying, right, I'm going to give you a budget of £100 a week in 2013 to get by, and you go, yeah, sound that, absolutely sound, I'll get by me gas, me lecky, me food, boss, sound, no problem whatsoever. You probably still struggled then, but just an example. And then in 2024, saying, right, you're going to continue to have that £100 a week, even though your gas has gone through the roof, your electricity has gone through the roof, your foods have gone through the roof, your drinks have gone through the roof. But you still are limited to only spending that £100 per week. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it's not sustainable. And we'll leave you with that one. There you go. Just thought that there were a little video talking about some of the points from that meeting today. If I've missed anything that you want me to talk about, let us know in the comments, and I'll go through it in the next live stream. We will be back later tonight with the preview to the game against Crystal Palace tomorrow, so don't forget to look out for that one. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below as well. Don't forget to leave a like if you have enjoyed it. Big thank you all for watching, and we'll see you after.